Hello and welcome. I'm Anand Naidu, filling in for Riz Khan. How does a country deal with illegal immigration without affecting the free movement of labor and trade? The U.S. state of Arizona, which borders Mexico, has been struggling with illegal immigration for more than a decade. It's estimated that nearly 500,000 people are in the state illegally. In the absence of clear federal policy, the state will now require aliens to carry their immigration documents on them at all times. The law also empowers local police to stop and question people if there is, quote, reasonable suspicion that they have or intend to commit a crime. Critics say the law is racist, and some have urged an economic boycott of Arizona. On today's show, we ask, is Arizona's controversial law legalizing racial profiling or an effective answer to illegal immigration? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or email, and we also, of course, welcome your phone calls on the show. Joining me now is Miguel Tinker Salas, a professor of history and Latin American studies at Pomona College, where he specializes in contemporary Mexican politics and border society, as well as Latino communities. He is author of The Enduring Legacy, Oil, Culture and Society in Venezuela. Randy Pullen is chairman of the Arizona Republican Party and treasurer of the Republican National Committee. In 2008, he served on the party's platform committee, which included a strong immigration plank. Mr. Pullen was the first GOP state chairman to oppose the 2007 Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill, which was put forth in Congress. Lizette Janess Olmos is Director of Communications for the League of United Latin American Citizens, or LULAC, the largest Latino civil rights group in the United States. LULAC is part of a new campaign called Unite Arizona, which is promoting a boycott of the state and working to block the Arizona law in court. Welcome to all of you to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies first, Lizette, let me start with you. Is this new piece of legislation, which has been passed by Arizona, a racist law that targets Hispanics mainly and other groups?
We feel, LULAC, as long as there's a reasonable suspicion that there is a concern that people will be racially profiled based on the premise of a reasonable suspicion. So we're working with various organizations such as MALDEV, NCLR, the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda, American Bar Association, to put forward fighting this in the courts.
Do you support a boycott to block this law?
Yes, our national board just approved a boycott of the state, and we have over 14 conferences that have already canceled. And we also have the National Latino Congreso and the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda that are also boycotting. And they've joined our site, unitearizona.org. We urge everyone to join us.
Okay. Mr. Pullen?
Yes.
Do you believe that this is a law that will target Mexicans and other Latin Americans, other groups in Arizona, unfairly?
Of course not. The way the law is drafted, it makes it very clear that racial profiling is not acceptable. As far as people having to carry documents with them, it's the federal law that aliens have to carry their documents with them at all times. So we're not asking for anything that's any different than what's already in the federal law.
But, I mean, federal law doesn't require people now to present those documents on demand, do they?
You have to carry your documents with you. And if you're stopped for reasonable search, which would include potential crime, or you're in the middle of committing a crime, you have to produce documents. You always have to produce documents. It's a requirement. Even of citizens, you have to produce documents. The first thing you're asked for is a driver's license or some other proof of identification.
All right, let's go to California to Professor Salas. Professor Salas, one of the things that the Arizona, or three of the things rather, that the Arizona immigration law does is that it says that immigrants must carry valid government identity documents. Local police can verify the legal status of immigrants, and it also prohibits the transport or hiring of illegals. Now, we just heard here from Mr. Pullen that this is a federal law that's been in existence for some time. There's nothing new here. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't, because the only way they can really establish suspicion or legal suspicion is, in fact, by looking at a person's physical appearance, their phenotype. So this law will lead to something called racial profiling. That is the only way that a law enforcement officer, who, by the way, is not trained in federal law and who's not trained actually on immigration law, can establish any kind of reasonable suspicion, is to use racial profiling. So we think, at least I think, that this law will, in fact, lead to racial profiling. It will implicitly explicitly pinpoint a particular group of people, those people of color, particularly people of ethnic Latino backgrounds, and it will lead to racial profiling. So therefore, it's illegal and it will be challenged in the courts.
Well, Mr. Pullen, one of the things that this law calls for is that there has to be, the bar has to be reasonable suspicion here. How does a law enforcement officer establish reasonable suspicion?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm not a law enforcement officer, so let's make that perfectly clear. But I have ridden with the police on numerous occasions where, in fact, they have made stops, and it's not at all like the professor just stated. That's not what happens at all. Essentially, they're in a car, they're driving erratically, they're making an incorrect right-left turn or speeding or something like that, and they're stopped. And when they're stopped, they don't have ID, they don't have registration for the vehicle, they don't have insurance for the vehicle. All those things are required in Arizona and other states as well, and quite a few other states. And as soon as they can't produce any of those documents, that's reasonable suspicion. And then the next thing is, obviously, they have the right to ask them, where are you from, if you don't have any identification. And at that point, that's the process begins at that. And that's what happens again and again and again and again. What the professor is saying is just not true. That's his opinion. That's what he thinks is going to happen. But that's not what happens, because it's been going on in Arizona, just like I described, for a number of years. And we haven't had racial profiling in Arizona. So to think that all of a sudden it's going to begin now is just not reasonable.
Okay, we'll give the professor a chance to respond to that in just a moment. Okay, go ahead.
For every one of those issues that the person just mentioned, the reality is there's already a law for someone who's driving erratically. There's already a law for someone who doesn't have a driver's license. There's already a law for every one of those major issues. So now we've added another something else to it, and that is reasonable cause. What is that reasonable cause? They look Mexican, they look Latino, they look Native American, because the reality is, how is the officer going to make those distinctions? Those laws already exist. Why did they have to add this additional requirement? That's the real issue here. Laws already exist on the books for every one of the issues that the individual just mentioned.
Well, that's a good question, and let me answer it for you, because we have a number of cities in Arizona that refuse to follow the law, and so this is to make it very clear that they should follow the law, and that's exactly what's intended, and that's what's going to happen. And the other comment you made was this is going to be proven, it's going to be challenged in court, it's going to be proven to be unconstitutional. That's not the case. I've been through this fight several times before with Proposition 200, with employer sanctions, and these were the same arguments that were made about supremacy in the past, and they just haven't held up in court, and that includes the U.S. Supreme Court.
Ms. Olmos, let me bring you in here. Do you believe that the legislation that was passed in Arizona is unconstitutional?
Yes, it is unconstitutional.
And why is it unconstitutional?
Because the reasonable suspicion leads to possible racial profiling, and that's something that in the Constitution people are protected. They have rights. And as Senator Menendez mentioned, he's not going to be going to Arizona and ask for his passport. He said, I'm a U.S. citizen, I'm not going to be asked for that. And so we want to make sure that our citizens are protected and that the people are not being, based on their color of their skin, discriminated against.
Well, do you buy the chairman's argument that this kind of legislation already exists in the United States? You are still required to carry identity documents with you, and you could be asked to present those documents when asked to by any officer of the state, for that matter.
Right, but not based on reasonable suspicion, meaning that Latinos are going to be more targeted based on what they look like. And
okay,
the Constitution is
but there's no proof of that. I mean, essentially what you're saying is the Arizona law is unconstitutional, but it mirrors the federal law. So what you're saying is the federal law is unconstitutional.
Well, it's unconstitutional because the federal government should be the one implementing, not the states taking upon themselves to do this in the case of Arizona, which is why it's unconstitutional,
that's incorrect.
Which is why we're going to be challenging it.
We've had those arguments already in the courts. The Supreme Court's already ruled the states have the right to enforce federal laws.
In this case, the federal law.
But the federal law will trump state law.
Exactly.
It does, but this law is consistent and concurs with the federal law, just like Proposition 200 concurred with the federal law, and our employer sanctions law concurred with the federal law.
Well, I think that's where the difference is, and I think that's where the Supreme Court is going to have to step in to decide whether that is the case. Well, let me go to one of our callers. We have Carlos calling from right here in Washington. Carlos, go ahead with your question.
Good afternoon. I really enjoy your program. I agree with the gentleman right there. I think this law is very legitimate because I am an American citizen. It is federal law that I carry my ID on me. I'm an African American male. If I get stopped in my car for any infraction, anything I do, I have to show all those documents. My state ID, my district ID, my insurance, and registration. I mean, I don't understand why this fight with illegal immigrants, that they are demanding same rights as citizens. And this woman keeps saying that federal or state of law enforcement officials enforce federal law all the time.
What is your question, Carlos?
My question is, why are they so against this? Arizona has a problem with illegal immigration, and the federal government is not doing anything upon it. So the people in Arizona, in their state, are electing to do something about it.
Okay, let me put that question to Lisette Olmos.
We're working with both parties, the Democrats and Republicans, to address this immigration problem. And that's why we need to pass comprehensive immigration reform, so that we can have border security and also a legal pathway for the millions of people that are hiding in the shadows. This is a security issue as well, which is why Senator Schumer has proposed the biometric ID card. And we need to make sure that everyone's accounted for, and we need to have something passed this year, which is why the Congresswoman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen from Florida, who's a Republican, came out saying, you know, we've been trying to push this issue forward, and we would like to have more Republicans come on board with this issue. And right now we have the Democratic support, and the President Barack Obama has stressed this is important, but he needs help from the Republican Party. So I'd like to see that the Republican Party also step up to the plate, as they voted about 9 of them in 2006 for this, that they would come again and support this, so that we can address this issue on a federal level, because it is an issue that is of concern to millions of people around the country that are all affected by this.
Okay, let's go to another caller. This is Rick calling from California. Rick, go ahead with your question.
Well, first of all this whining about racial profiling is a red herring. These two people that are opposed to the Arizona law are for open borders and have no suggestion whatever on what to do. The Secretary of DHS, Napolitano, was the governor of Arizona for 6 years. She knows better than anybody the problems down there. This president, the previous President Bush, the previous President Clinton did nothing. They have killing of ranchers, shooting of police officers. Phoenix is the kidnap capital of North America, all tied to Mexican drug gangs and illegal aliens. So I would like to know what these two people who are opposed to the Arizona law, what is their suggestion for solving the problem along the border, and not Ms. Olmos' suggestion that we have amnesty for everybody. How do we secure the border and secure the people, which is what the Arizona government is doing right now?
Okay, let's go to Professor Salas to answer that question. Professor?
Well, I think there's a major issue going on here, and that is conflating immigration with crime. There are two separate issues. Not all Mexican immigrants are criminals, and the idea that somehow because you have immigration you have crime is absurd. And in fact, 2 Phoenix Police Department officers, 1 in Tucson and 1 in Phoenix, have filed a lawsuit against this bill because it said it impedes their ability to carry out their job. So the reality is, 1, you need a comprehensive immigration bill. The idea that state by state will create a hodgepodge of immigration bills is ludicrous. Immigration is a federal prerogative, not a state's prerogative. That's number 1. So we need a comprehensive immigration bill. We need to address the question of crime. The same crime wave that's affecting Mexico invariably is affecting the U.S. Why? Because the U.S. is the #1 consumer of illegal drugs in the world. That's the reality the U.S. has to deal with and confront. And that's something that none of the Arizona bills actually address, and neither will a hodgepodge of immigration bills along border states address this issue. No one is talking about open borders, although they do exist for capital, they exist for institutions, they exist for everything else. The question still remains, you need a comprehensive immigration bill to grapple with the fact that 2 countries' economies are increasingly integrated. To do otherwise is to put an ostrich head into the sand and expect it to go away, and it will not go away.
May I comment on that?
Go ahead.
The professor seems to be confusing illegal immigration with legal immigration. Illegal immigration is a crime in Arizona, and the people who bring them across the border are actually trafficking in a crime. And he seems to forget that. That's the problem we're having here. And talking about bringing people out of the shadows and so forth, I mean, the first thing we need to do is secure our borders. We have, our border with Mexico and Arizona is more porous than the Afghan-Pakistani border. as it stands right now. This is a failure of the federal government. It's not a failure in Arizona. And we're doing the federal government's job in Arizona right now. And it's a shame that we have to do that. But unfortunately, that's what it is. And the courts have already held. States have the right to enforce federal laws, including immigration law. Supremacy law does not rule here. And I've been through this court battle 7 times. And 7 times the courts have ruled states can do this. And my anticipation is it will happen an 8th, a 9th, and a 10th time with respect to this law.
Mr. Olmos, I'll give you a chance to respond, but we have to take a short break right now. We'll have more of our discussion in just a moment. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're looking at Arizona's controversial immigration law and how it may impact immigrant communities. I'm joined by Miguel Salas, a professor of history and Latin American studies at Pomona College. Randy Pullen is chairman of the Arizona Republican Party, and Lizette Jeunesse Olmos, director of communications for the League of United Latin American Citizens, or LULAC. Let's get back to the questions. And Lizette, I'm going to start with you again. You are advocating a boycott. Yes. An economic boycott of Arizona. Is there a danger when you impose a boycott of this kind that you would affect other constituencies? You might affect people who are poor, low-income groups might be affected.
What we're looking at is that back when the state failed to recognize Reverend Martin Luther King's holiday, we had a boycott back then, and it ended up being that it got the attention of the state, so that they ended up now recognizing the holiday. And just like that, it's gonna have a short term, so that for the long-term benefits, the state could lose billions of dollars, because we're looking at targeting the 2011 All-Star to be moved. We have sporting events that we're looking at moving to different locations. We have over 40 organizations that are part of our website, including mayors, including Republicans. You have Jeb Bush, who supports this boycott. You have Florida, Marco Rubio, who also says he supports this boycott. So it's not just Democrats, you also have Republicans also who say that this law is unconstitutional. Ileana Ross-Layton was just on the Univision Florida Representative Republican Party saying this is wrong, and for people to be racially profiled. And we need comprehensive immigration reform, which addresses border security, which LULAC is for. We're not for open borders, and we're not for amnesty. Let's get that clear. We're for border security, along with also a component of the citizenship, because we need to address both issues. We can't just address one issue without addressing the immigration issue as well.
Okay. Mr. Pullen, a boycott?
A boycott makes no sense, and I'm old enough to remember what the Martin Luther King boycott was about in Arizona. And these situations are totally different. There's no comparison in these situations. Back then, most of Arizonans supported having a Martin Luther King Day. We had a governor who did not. And so then it made some sense, and that law was changed pretty quickly. That was overridden, and in fact we had a Martin Luther King Day.
But I suppose the end result was that the boycott did achieve its purpose.
But the difference was, at that point in time, the people in Arizona were in agreement with it. Now, the people in Arizona, 70% of them agree with this law. They agree that the federal law should be enforced. The Black Chamber of Commerce in Arizona, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce in Tucson, the chairman of the Democrat Party in Arizona, they all oppose the boycott, as does Marco Rubio. Your information is incorrect.
Well, he just changed recently because they had said they would make some adjustments. But you know, we still need to see how this is going to be implemented without the reasonable suspicion angle to it, because there are parts that are unconstitutional on that. And then also, 80% of Latinos oppose this in Arizona. We just had this latest poll that came out last week. So you have the mayors in the state that oppose it. You have law enforcement that oppose it.
Okay, let's go to Professor Salas.
Law enforcement does not oppose this in Arizona. We have two or three.
Some have.
Two or three have. The vast majority of law enforcement support this
I want to
law.
give the last word to Professor Salas in California. The National Council of La Raza has called for the boycott as well. What form do you think those measures would take?
Well, I think the measures will take people simply not visiting Arizona, conventions being canceled, efforts at sports events. But not only that, I mean, it has an international consequence as well. The government of Mexico has issued a travel advisory for its citizens not to visit Arizona. The governments of Guatemala have issued a travel advisory. The National University of Mexico has ceased its exchange programs with the U of A. The Union of South American Nations, and it represents all of South America, has issued its own travel advisory and condemnation of this bill. The U.S. will be judged in relationship to human rights, in relationship to how it treats immigrants as on the basis of this. And the U.S. will have a consequence for U.S. foreign policy in the region, will have a consequence for how Arizona is viewed, and it will have an economic consequence as well. So I think that the consequences go much beyond this, and what is a narrow bill within a very much of an electoral year in the middle of an economic crisis, which reminds us of California circa 1994, will have long-term consequences for Arizona.
Mr. Pullen, you are facing legal action from the federal government, aren't you?
Not yet, but I assume we will be at some point in time. And again, I think the professor continues to not understand there's a difference between legal and illegal immigration, and people who support open borders, they don't see any difference between the two, and there is a significant difference. Those who come through here legally go through a long, drawn-out process to come here. Those who come across illegally, they are obviously.
Yeah, but I don't think anyone here supports open borders. Nobody said that they do.
Well, I think that, but that's essentially what the professor is talking about here. He keeps confusing illegal with legal immigration.
No,
they're not the same.
I think you keep confusing crime with immigration. There already
illegal
exist
immigration
laws
is a crime.
on the books. Laws exist on the books.
Okay.
All you have to do is implement them. You don't have to racially profile an entire population of people.
All right, so we're going to have to leave it there. I'm sorry we've run out of time. Thank you for being with us, to all of you. And thank you for watching. Remember, you can follow the show on Facebook and see what we're up to there. In addition to giving us your feedback on the topics we cover, you can also interact with other viewers around the world. On the next show, we look at the growing Pakistani links to a spate of recent attacks and bomb plots around the world. Is Pakistan becoming the new epicenter in the global fight against religious extremism? Make sure to tune in for that. See you next time.